Prior to the Great Depression, roads in North Georgia, when they existed, were little more than pig trails. Roads were most often built through local efforts, communities, and even families. Wesley Dockery accounts of how his grandfather in Lumpkin County built a road near Stone Pile Gap. Andrew John Dockery took a crowbar, poked holes in the place where he wanted the road to be, and put corn in the holes. He then took his hogs and loosed them in the area, and they rooted it up, loosening the ground. Then he pulled a scrape behind his horses and smoothed the road out. I'm standing here on the newer version of Gates Chapel, which is obviously paved, but above me in the woods here is the older Gates Chapel Road. Much of it was torn up through the same method of using hogs and corn. These events took place in the days before government responsibility for roads. U.S. Forest Ranger Arthur Woody was not only famous for bringing deer back to North Georgia, but also getting a road from Suches, Georgia, which was rather isolated, all the way down to Dahlonega. Government officials responded to Woody's request to build a road with, they did not build roads, but they certainly improved them. Woody set about to build the road, sometimes at his own personal expense. Henry Moore and Herman Caldwell, both of Lumpkin County, recounted their time of working on those roads. The pay was $2 a day for a strong and healthy man who could do a lot of work. This was in 1926, well before the CCC projects, which paid $1 a day. Once the road was complete, Woody informed the state. However, it would not be until the mid-1930s that the CCC boys would actually gravel the road, a road that would become Highway 60. There is an interesting juxtaposition between Arthur Woody's road from Suches to Dahlonega and the road that was built across Fort Mountain. Woody had enlisted aid and private contracts from around the area, while the Henry Grady Road Committee helped pay for the road across Fort Mountain. I'm standing here 7 miles west of Ellijay on what would become the Henry Grady Highway. Behind me on this hill would also be the Henry Grady High School, which was approved and built in 1931, a boon for the local school children. We're in the heart of the mountain town community, once inhabited by Native Americans. The road here was at one time only a trail, and it was improved by locals into a wagon trail, but it did not reach all the way from Ellijay across the mountain to Chatsworth. I'm here in the cemetery at 9 Mile Church, which is just off of the road, State number 2, US 76. Standing by the graveside of Chris Boatwright and his wife, Eunice Hagan. Eunice was from the eastern side of Gilmer County in a place called Bucktown, while Chris resided here locally at the base of Grassy Mountain in a place called Boatwright Valley, because so many Boatwrights lived therein. Construction on the Henry Grady Highway project across Fort Mountain began in the summer heat of June 1931. Chris Boatwright lived just a hop, skip, and jump away from where the project was underway. Chris worked through the summer of 1931 as crews used picks, axes, shovels, and dynamite to clear a swath across Fort Mountain. By August of 1931, night crews were also in play to speed up the work. By August of 1932, a rough but passable road connected both sides of Fort Mountain. While this road project took place before the implementation of the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933, the road really helped move both men and equipment to the top of Fort Mountain as they began work on Fort Mountain State Park. Chris often referred to the road as the Cohutta Turnpike. Chris also remembered the heat of that summer and often remarked, after working a very hard life, how much he wanted to have a nice shady place to rest. And there's where we're standing, in the only shady place in the 9 Mile Church Cemetery. Here we are on Fort Mountain at the Murray and Gilmer County lines. As you can see, the road winds across the ridge line that forms this mountain. Down below, you can see kudzu. The Civilian Conservation Corps planted the kudzu to prevent soil erosion in areas that were difficult to reach. Many times they were planting pine trees to replace those areas that had been logged out earlier. The invasive plant species kudzu grows everywhere in the southeast, up the eastern seaboard as far as Maine, all along the Gulf Coast, and even in Washington and Oregon. While it doesn't look like much now, by the end of the summer, the entire side of this hill will be covered as kudzu grows about a foot a day. The Civilian Conservation Corps and farmers unwittingly spread kudzu throughout much of the United States. For farmers, they were offered $8 an acre to plant kudzu. I'm standing here in the Cohutta Wilderness of North Georgia, near the top of Fort Mountain, about 2,832 feet above sea level. What you see behind me is an ancient stone wall of mysterious origin. Some people attribute it to Native Americans building it as a defensive structure around 500 CE. Others say this was a honeymoon spot for Native Americans, while others speculate that the structure was built by European explorers. It still remains to be decided, but what I do know is, in the 1930s, this area became a hotspot for CCC work, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This piece of land was donated by Ivan Allen in 1934. You can see the stone wall here. It reaches about 885 feet in length. However, we're going to go up to see a more modern legend, the fire tower that was built by a local from Ellijay, Georgia, Arnold Bailey. So here we are at the top of Fort Mountain at the Stone Fire Tower. The Civilian Conservation Corps constructed this particular tower between 1934 and early 1935. While the Civilian Conservation Corps constructed a variety of towers all over North Georgia in order to protect their reforestation efforts, this particular tower has a very touching story. The foreman for this project was Arnold Bailey. Now, Arnold Bailey was from Gilmer County, Georgia, back down the east side of Fort Mountain. And Arnold Bailey was in love with one Margaret Reese. If you notice, right above the window here, there's a very special stone that the 20-year-old stonemason carved for her. He set the stone, and once they finished the project, he went back down the east side of the mountain and had her come up with him to propose to her on this very spot. They were married in February of 1935.